In the quiet little town of Willow Creek, life was as peaceful as it could get. The streets were lined with neat rows of houses, each one looking like it had been plucked straight out of a magazine. Families strolled down the sidewalks in the evenings, kids rode their bikes around cul-de-sacs, and neighbors waved hello to each other over white picket fences. It was the kind of place where nothing much ever happened, until it did. The couple who moved into house number 14 on Maple Street didn't know what they were walking into when they first arrived. They were just looking for a fresh start after years of living in the chaos of the big city. The husband worked remotely as a software developer, spending most of his days typing away at his laptop while sipping coffee. His wife, on the other hand, was no ordinary suburban mom. She had spent more than a decade serving in some of the toughest roles imaginable before retiring to train others. Her expertise? Tactical combat skills, specifically for elite military units. Think Navy SEALs. Yeah, that level of badassery. When they bought the house, they thought Willow Creek would be the perfect escape from the craziness of their past lives. A calm neighborhood, friendly neighbors, and plenty of space for her to set up a small outdoor gym where she could continue doing what she loved, training people. Little did they know, trouble wasn't going to come from outside threats or dangerous missions this time. Nope, it came wrapped in something far less exciting. The Homeowners Association, HOA. Now, if you've ever lived in a neighborhood with an HOA, you already know how things go. These groups are usually made up of well-meaning but sometimes overly enthusiastic volunteers who take pride in keeping everything picture perfect. In Willow Creek, the HOA had rules about pretty much everything: how long your grass could grow, what color your front door could be painted, whether you could park an RV in your driveway. Most residents followed the rules without complaint. Because, honestly, who wants to argue over paint colors? But then there was the couple at house number 14. Things started smoothly enough. They unpacked boxes, decorated the house, and settled into their new routine. The wife decided to install a modest outdoor gym setup in the backyard, a few pull-up bars, climbing ropes, and some mats. Nothing fancy, but functional for her work. To her, it seemed harmless since the equipment wasn't visible from the street. Besides, she figured, it wasn't like she was running a loud construction site or throwing wild parties every weekend. That's when the notes started showing up. At first, they were polite enough. Slipped under the door or left on the porch. They read things like, "We noticed the structures in your backyard. Please ensure they comply with HOA guidelines." Or, friendly reminder, backyard modifications require prior approval. The couple shrugged it off, thinking it was just standard procedure. After all, they weren't breaking any major laws. Here, they were simply trying to make a living, but the HOA wasn't satisfied with being ignored. What began as harmless reminders soon turned into something more serious. One evening, two men showed up at their doorstep. Both looked like they belonged in retirement commercials rather than enforcement roles. One wore khakis and a polo shirt. The other carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. They introduced themselves as members of the HOA's Compliance Committee. "We're here to discuss the issue with your backyard," said Khaki Man, glancing nervously at the climbing ropes visible through the fence slats. The wife listened patiently, explaining that the equipment was essential for her job. Without missing a beat, she added that it wasn't causing harm to anyone and certainly wasn't violating any noise ordinances. But the men weren't convinced. They exchanged skeptical looks before handing over yet another notice. This one wasn't so friendly anymore. It warned of potential fines and worse if the structures weren't removed within 48 hours. As the men walked away, the husband sighed and leaned against the doorway. "Maybe we should just take it down," he suggested, rubbing his temples. "It's not worth the hassle." His wife, however, wasn't ready to back down. Years of training soldiers had taught her the importance of standing firm when it mattered. She shook her head firmly. No way. We're not letting them bully us into giving up something this important. Little did they know those words would prove truer than either of them could have imagined. Because back in Willow Creek, where nothing interesting ever happened, tensions were about to reach a boiling point, and the fallout would leave everyone talking for weeks to come. The clock ticked down on the 48-hour ultimatum, and the couple at house number 14 tried to keep things as normal as possible. But normal was starting to feel like a distant memory. The wife went about her day, training clients in the backyard while keeping one ear tuned for any unusual activity outside. Her husband sat glued to his laptop, occasionally glancing out the window, half expecting another visit from the HOA enforcers. By now, word had spread through the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, speculating about what was happening at the house with the controversial backyard gym. Some thought the couple was being unreasonable. Others secretly admired their refusal to cave under pressure. A few even admitted they liked the idea of a trainer living nearby, though none were brave enough to say it aloud. On the second evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the tension finally broke. Two figures approached the house, silhouetted against the fading light. It was the same duo from before, the khaki-wearing clipboard carrier and his slightly grumpier companion. Only this time, they weren't alone. Trailing behind them was a third man, tall and burly, wearing a black t-shirt stretched tight across his broad shoulders. He looked less like a concerned homeowner and more like someone you'd see working security at a nightclub. "Here we go," muttered the husband, peeking through the blinds. His wife, who was wrapping up a session with a client, glanced over and immediately understood what was happening. She stepped forward, her posture calm but alert, like a lioness sizing up intruders. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady as she opened the gate leading to the backyard. The three men exchanged quick glances before Clipboard Guy spoke up. "We're here to ensure compliance with the HOA guidelines," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the climbing ropes and pull-up bars. "This equipment is non-negotiable. You need to remove it immediately." The wife crossed her arms, unfazed. "I've already explained why this setup is necessary for my work. And unless you can show me specific evidence that it violates your rules, I'm not taking it down." That's when Burly Guy stepped forward, his expression darkening. "You don't get to decide what's reasonable or not," he growled, his tone far more aggressive than anyone expected. "We gave you plenty of chances to fix this. Now it's time to listen." Her client, still standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to seeing confrontations like this during training sessions. The husband, meanwhile, hovered near the back door, unsure whether to intervene or call the police. Things escalated quickly. Burly Guy reached into his waistband and pulled out a handgun, pointing it directly at the wife. "Last warning," he barked, his voice loud enough to echo through the quiet neighborhood. "Take it down or else." For a split second, everyone froze. The husband's heart pounded in his chest. The client instinctively raised his hands, unsure what to do next. Even the two original HOA guys seemed startled by their companions' sudden display of force. But the wife? She didn't flinch. Years of tactical training kicked in instantly. In one fluid motion, she assessed the situation, identified the threat, and acted. Before anyone could react, she closed the distance between herself and Burly Guy, using techniques honed through countless drills and real-world scenarios. With precision and control, she disarmed him, twisting the gun out of his grip and pinning him to the ground in seconds. The entire scene unfolded so fast that it felt surreal. One moment, Burly Guy was waving a weapon around like he owned the place. The next, he was face down on the grass, completely immobilized. The other two men stumbled backward, their faces pale with shock. "Call the cops," the wife instructed her husband without missing a beat. Then, turning to the stunned client, she added calmly, "Don't worry, it's handled." As sirens wailed in the distance, neighbors began pouring out of their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some stood frozen, mouths agape, while others scrambled to record the chaos on their phones. No one could believe what they were witnessing. What started as a petty disagreement over backyard equipment had spiraled into something straight out of an action movie. When the police arrived, the scene was chaotic but under control. Officers separated the parties involved, confiscating the weapon and gathering statements. By then, whispers about the wife's background had already started circulating. Someone mentioned hearing rumors about her military experience. Another neighbor chimed in, saying they'd seen her teaching intense workout sessions in the yard. Within hours, the story took on a life of its own. Back inside the house, the couple sat together, processing everything that had just happened. The husband shook his head in disbelief. "I knew you were tough, but wow, that was insane." She managed a small smile, though her eyes remained sharp. "People always underestimate me. Guess some things never change." Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with conversation. For years, Willow Creek had been known as a sleepy little suburb where nothing exciting ever happened. But tonight, it became clear that even the most unassuming places could harbor unexpected drama, and extraordinary people died as dawn broke over Maple Street. The couple braced themselves for whatever came next. They knew the fallout wouldn't be easy, but one thing was certain: no one would forget this showdown anytime soon. The morning after the backyard showdown felt surreal. The neighborhood that had always been so quiet and predictable was suddenly buzzing with whispers, speculation, and disbelief. By sunrise, news of what happened at house number 14 had spread like wildfire, not just among the neighbors, but across social media too. Photos of the scene taken by curious onlookers made their way online almost instantly, accompanied by captions like "Suburban drama turns dangerous" and "HOA enforcer pulls gun in backyard feud." It wasn't long before local reporters caught wind of the story. For the couple at the center of it all, waking up to this kind of attention was overwhelming. The wife sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone as notifications poured in. Her husband leaned against the counter, sipping coffee while trying to process everything. Outside, camera crews set up shop near the end of their driveway, eager to get a comment from anyone willing to talk. Neighbors who usually kept to themselves now gathered in clusters, discussing every detail of the incident. "It's like we're living in some kind of movie," the husband muttered. Glancing out the window at the growing crowd, his wife nodded, though she looked more amused than stressed. "Welcome to my world," she said dryly. "Except usually, I'm the one training people for situations like this, not starring in them." Despite the chaos, they agreed on one thing: staying calm was key. They decided to address the situation head on, knowing that ignoring it would only make things worse. When a reporter finally knocked on their door, they invited her inside for an interview. Sitting across from the camera, the wife spoke clearly and confidently, explaining exactly what had happened without exaggerating or pointing fingers. "We moved here looking for peace and quiet," she began, her tone measured but firm. "But when someone pulls a gun on you over something as trivial as backyard equipment, it crosses a line. This isn't about rules anymore, it's about safety and respect." Her words resonated deeply, not just with the reporters, but also with many of the neighbors who had initially sided with the HOA. As clips of the interview aired on local news stations, public opinion started shifting. People began questioning how such a minor issue could escalate so dangerously. Was enforcing aesthetic guidelines really worth threatening someone's life? Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled to do damage control. Their board members held an emergency meeting late that afternoon, frantically debating how to handle the fallout. Burly Guy, the man who had pulled the gun, was quickly fired from his role as an enforcer, though no one seemed particularly sorry to see him go. The two original volunteers who had accompanied him issued public apologies, claiming they had no idea he intended to bring a weapon. Whether or not anyone believed them was another matter entirely. As days passed, the story continued to dominate headlines. Local newspapers ran features highlighting the wife's background, revealing her years of service and expertise in tactical training. Readers were fascinated by the contrast between her unassuming suburban lifestyle and her high-stakes past. Some even joked that the HOA must have thought twice before sending anyone else to deliver notices after learning who they were dealing with. Back in Willow Creek, the couple found themselves becoming unlikely celebrities. Neighbors who had once eyed them suspiciously now approached them with admiration or at least curiosity. One elderly woman stopped by to drop off homemade cookies, thanking the wife for standing up to the HOA. Another neighbor admitted he'd always admired her strength and determination, even if he hadn't said so aloud before. "I guess I never realized how much pressure people feel to follow these rules," the husband remarked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "It's crazy how something so small can spiral out of control." His wife nodded thoughtfully. "People think rules keep order, but sometimes they create fear instead. Fear of stepping out of line, fear of being different. Maybe this whole mess will make folks rethink why they're so quick to judge." And in a way, that's exactly what happened. The incident sparked deeper conversations within the community about fairness, accountability, and the true purpose of the HOA. At the next neighborhood meeting, residents openly challenged the board's methods, demanding transparency and better communication. Several suggested revising the rules to allow for exceptions in cases like theirs, where practical needs outweighed aesthetic concerns. For the couple, the ordeal reinforced their decision to stay put despite the drama. Moving might have been easier, but running away wouldn't solve anything. Instead, they chose to face the challenges head-on, using the experience as an opportunity to connect with their neighbors and advocate for change. One evening, as the wife prepared for another training session in the backyard, she paused to look around. The climbing rope swayed gently in the breeze, and the pull-up bars stood tall under the fading light. To anyone else, it might have looked like ordinary gym equipment, but to her, it represented resilience, a reminder that standing your ground doesn't mean starting fights. It means refusing to back down when it matters most. As clients began arriving for the workout, she greeted each one with a warm smile, ready to share not just her skills but also the lessons she'd learned along the way. Because in the end, life in Willow Creek wasn't just about keeping up appearances. It was about finding strength in unexpected places and building connections that lasted far beyond backyard disputes. The days following the backyard showdown brought a whirlwind of emotions, debates, and unexpected changes to Willow Creek. What had started as a small disagreement over backyard equipment turned into a full-blown reckoning for the neighborhood and, especially for the HOA. For the couple at house number 14, life became a balancing act between dealing with the aftermath of the incident and trying to move forward in a community that was suddenly watching their every move. At first, the attention felt overwhelming. Every time they stepped outside, someone seemed to have an opinion or a question. Neighbors who rarely spoke before now stopped them during evening walks to share their thoughts. Some expressed support, thanking them for standing up to the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Others were more cautious, unsure whether to side with the couple or stick to the status quo. But one thing was clear. The incident had shaken everyone out of their complacency. The HOA board, meanwhile, found itself under intense scrutiny. Residents began attending meetings in record numbers, demanding answers about how such a minor issue could spiral so dangerously out of control. At one particularly heated gathering, a young father stood up and addressed the board directly. "You're supposed to protect our property values," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "But pulling guns on people? That's not protecting anything. It's creating fear." His words struck a nerve. Other neighbors chimed in, recounting past grievances they'd kept quiet about for years. One woman talked about being fined for planting flowers that didn't match the approved color palette. Another man described how the HOA once threatened legal action because his mailbox leaned slightly to the left after a storm. These stories painted a picture of an organization more focused on rigid enforcement than fostering a sense of community. Mounting pressure, the HOA announced sweeping reforms. They hired a professional management company to oversee operations, replacing the volunteer-led model that had allowed things to spiral out of control. New policies were introduced to ensure conflicts were resolved through dialogue rather than threats. Perhaps most importantly, they established a mediation process for disputes, encouraging residents to work together instead of turning to drastic measures. For the couple at the center of the controversy, these changes came as a relief, but they weren't satisfied yet. The wife, in particular, saw an opportunity to push for something bigger, a shift in mindset. She began hosting informal gatherings in her backyard, inviting neighbors to join her for coffee and conversation. At first, attendance was sparse. Many were hesitant to engage with someone who had become both a hero and a lightning rod. But slowly, curiosity got the better of them. During one of these gatherings, a retired teacher named Linda shared her perspective. "I've lived here for 20 years, and I've always followed the rules because I thought it was the right thing to do," she admitted. "But this whole situation made me realize we've been so focused on appearances that we forgot what really matters: being good neighbors." Her comments sparked a lively discussion. People talked openly about their frustrations, fears, and hopes for the future. Some suggested organizing community events to bring everyone closer together. Others proposed revising the HOA guidelines to prioritize functionality over aesthetics. By the end of the evening, there was a palpable sense of unity, a shared commitment to making Willow Creek a better place. Inspired by these conversations, the wife decided to take things a step further. Drawing on her experience as a trainer, she offered free workshops to teach conflict resolution and de-escalation techniques. The sessions quickly gained popularity, attracting not just neighbors, but also members of the HOA board eager to learn from her expertise. In one memorable class, she demonstrated how body language and tone can diffuse tense situations, a lesson that resonated deeply with those who had witnessed the backyard standoff firsthand. "I'm not saying you'll never have disagreements," she told the group during one session. "But if you approach problems with respect and understanding, you're less likely to let things escalate. And trust me, nobody wants to end up on the news because of a misunderstanding." Her humor put everyone at ease, breaking down barriers that had existed for years. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere in Willow Creek began to change. Conversations that once felt tense or awkward became more open and collaborative. Even the HOA board members, who had initially seemed defensive, started showing up to neighborhood events with genuine smiles and handshakes. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were still moments of tension, especially when old habits resurfaced. A few stubborn holdouts refused to acknowledge the need for change, clinging to the belief that strict rules were the only way to maintain order. But even they couldn't deny the positive impact the couple's efforts were having on the community. One evening, as the husband sat on the porch watching the sunset, He turned to his wife with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll ever get back to normal around here?" he asked. She chuckled softly, leaning back in her chair. "Normal's overrated," she replied. "Besides, I think we're building something better than normal. It might take time, but look at how far we've come already." He nodded, glancing toward the backyard where her training equipment still stood proudly. Despite everything, it remained untouched, a symbol of resilience and determination. Clients continued to arrive for sessions, drawn not just by her skills but also by the story behind them. Many left inspired, not only physically stronger but mentally tougher too. As weeks turned into months, Willow Creek transformed into a neighborhood unlike any other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, a place where people cared about each other more than they cared about rules, where laughter echoed through the streets alongside friendly greetings, and where a quiet little cul-de-sac became the setting for a lesson in courage, unity, and the power of standing firm when it mattered most. Through it all, the couple at house number 14 remained at the heart of it, not as outsiders, but as integral members of a community they had helped reshape. Their journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it, because sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can spark the biggest changes and leave a legacy that lasts long after the headlines fade away. Months had passed since the backyard showdown, and Willow Creek was almost unrecognizable from the quiet, rule-obsessed suburb it once was. The transformation wasn't immediate. It took time, patience, and a lot of hard work, but little by little, the neighborhood began to feel like a real community. Neighbors who used to exchange polite nods now shared laughs over backyard barbecues. Kids played freely in the cul-de-sacs, their parents chatting nearby without fear of judgment for mismatched curtains or slightly overgrown lawns. And at the center of it all stood the couple at house number 14, whose courage and resilience had sparked a chain reaction they never could have predicted. The wife's outdoor gym remained exactly where it had always been, a modest setup of climbing ropes, pull-up bars, and mats tucked neatly into the backyard. What had once been seen as a violation of HOA rules was now celebrated as a symbol of strength and perseverance. Clients continued to arrive for training sessions, but these days they weren't the only ones drawn to the space. Neighbors often stopped by to watch her work, marveling at her precision and dedication. Some even joined in, eager to test their limits under her guidance. One Saturday morning, a group of kids gathered around the fence, giggling as they watched her demonstrate a particularly challenging exercise. "Think you can do this?" she teased, flashing them a playful grin. Without hesitation, one brave boy hopped over the fence and gave it a try. Though he didn't make it far, his determination earned cheers from the crowd. By the end of the session, half the neighborhood kids were lining up to take their turn, their laughter filling the air. Her husband watched from the porch, shaking his head with amusement. "Looks like you've got a fan club," he called out, raising an eyebrow. She shrugged, wiping sweat from her brow. "Kids are tougher than they look," she replied. "Besides, it's good for them to see what they're capable of." That moment summed up so much of what had changed in Willow Creek. It wasn't just about bending rules or standing up to authority anymore. It was about inspiring others to believe in themselves and each other. The couple had become more than just residents. They were role models, showing everyone that strength wasn't just physical. It was also about having the courage to challenge the status quo and build something better. As summer approached, the neighborhood came alive with events that reflected its newfound spirit. There were block parties, movie nights, and even a charity run organized by none other than the wife herself. She turned the event into a fun obstacle course, incorporating elements from her own training routines. Families raced through tunnels made of tarps, scaled makeshift walls, and crawled under nets while cheering each other on. It was chaotic, messy, and absolutely perfect, a celebration of teamwork and joy that left everyone breathless and grinning. Even the HOA, once the source of so much tension, embraced the shift. Their board meetings became less formal and more collaborative, focusing on solutions rather than punishments. They introduced programs to beautify common areas not with strict guidelines but with input from residents. Flower beds sprang up along sidewalks painted by volunteers during weekend workshops. A neglected park at the edge of the neighborhood was revitalized, thanks to a collective effort that brought people of all ages together. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt alive, not just as a place to live, but as a home. For the couple, staying in Willow Creek had proven to be the right decision. Moving would have been easier, sure, but leaving wouldn't have fixed anything. Instead, they chose to stay and fight, not with anger or aggression, but with kindness, understanding, and a willingness to lead by example. Their presence reminded everyone that change doesn't happen overnight, but it's always possible when people come together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the couple sat on their porch sipping lemonade. The air was filled with the sounds of crickets chirping and distant laughter from a neighbor's gathering down the street. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of months earlier. "You know," the husband said after a long pause, "I think we actually did it. We turned this place around." His wife smiled, leaning back in her chair. "We didn't do it alone," she corrected gently. "Everyone played a part. All we did was give them a reason to start." He nodded thoughtfully, glancing toward the backyard where her gym equipment still stood. "Do you ever regret it?" "All the drama, I mean." She shook her head firmly. "Not for a second. Sometimes you have to rock the boat to get anywhere. And besides," she added with a wink, "it kept life interesting." They both laughed, the sound blending seamlessly with the hum of the neighborhood. Life in Willow Creek wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements, occasional frustrations, and moments of doubt. But it was real, authentic, and full of heart. That was worth far more than any pristine lawn or perfectly matched paint job. As the stars began to twinkle above, the couple stayed outside a little longer, soaking in the warmth of their transformed community. They knew challenges would come again, that was inevitable. But they also knew they weren't alone anymore. Together, they had built something stronger than rules or regulations, a bond that couldn't be broken by threats or misunderstandings. And so, Willow Creek moved forward, not as a cookie-cutter suburb clinging to perfection, but as a vibrant, imperfect family learning to grow together. In the end, it wasn't about who won or lost a battle over backyard equipment. It was about finding strength in vulnerability, connection in conflict, and hope in the face of adversity. Because sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can inspire the greatest changes and leave behind a legacy that lasts long after the dust has settled.